I always thought the silence on the 63rd floor sounded different. Not like peace, more like precision. The kind that lives in the seams of stitched leather chairs and the cold whisper of climate-controlled glass. That's where I was sitting when she slid the termination letter across the desk without looking up. No eye contact, no hesitation. Just paper, black ink, and the kind of finality you usually reserve for funerals or federal indictments. "Your strategies are brilliant," she said, flipping her tablet to a new screen, her tone flat. "If we were in the 1960s. Her fingers tapped. Once. Twice. A rhythm of dismissal. I didn't answer. Just glanced at the company seal watermark on the top of the page, crisp under the recessed lights. My name in bold, Michael Creed, 48 years old. Until 15 minutes ago, I served as Chief Growth Architect at Aerodyne Cortex, a hybrid analytics firm that started in defense and wandered into retail, finance, and AI like a bored billionaire trying on hobbies. At our peak, I ran the department that brought in 76.3% of company revenue over 6 quarters. Not speculation, not projections, real returns, real growth. "Your retirement package is generous," she added, sliding a second envelope with her manicured hand. "More than you're owed, if we're being honest." She finally looked at me then. Pale eyes, clipped smile. The kind of face you see on magazine covers about the future of business. Gene-edited confidence, surgically manufactured poise. Her name was Emery Lorne, Harvard fast-track, machine learning prodigy, daughter of our founder, and now the de facto CEO, while he advised remotely from a vineyard in northern Spain. "Our success depends on algorithms now, not experience," she said. "Nothing personal." That was the line that stuck with me. Not the insult, but the phrase, "nothing personal." I smiled, stood, buttoned my coat with one hand, letter still in the other. She extended her hand. I took it. Firm shake, no words. She held eye contact like a boxer, watching for a twitch before a punch. I nodded and walked out of that office like it wasn't the last time I'd ever stand in it. The elevator hummed as it dropped, floor by floor, carrying me down through the empire I helped build. One floor for procurement, another for strategy, engineering, client retention. My fingerprints were on every wall, every deck, every success story, pitched to shareholders in sleek fonts and buzzwords. And just like that, I was being erased, with a swipe and a smile. I stepped out into the lobby. Security nodded, unaware. My keycard still worked, for now. I pushed through the glass doors, out into the sharp spring air. The street was alive with horns and motion, the kind of indifferent rhythm only cities can maintain, while lives unravel above them. I didn't go home. I walked 4 blocks east, turned left at the blacked-out coffee shop that only opened for executives and night owls, and ducked into a parking garage that still registered my biometric profile. Level 2, Space 47, my reserve. The car didn't matter. What mattered was the briefcase inside the trunk. Matte black, reinforced, no logo. Inside, it was the other half of my life. Before I was a strategist for Aerodyne Cortex, I spent 12 years with the 4th Psychological Operations Group, attached to JSOC. Call signs, covert campaigns, perception control. My job wasn't just to win. It was to make the enemy doubt they were ever winning at all. I learned how to wage war with rumors, restructure belief systems, destabilize economies with nothing but timing and suggestion. The battlefield just got cleaner when I swapped fatigues for cufflinks. What they never understood, what Emery will understand eventually, is that strategies don't expire. People do. And she just terminated the only person who knew which wires held this place together. Not the code, not the models, the culture, the narrative, the emotional architecture that makes people believe in what they're selling. I opened the briefcase. A single hard drive, disconnected, air-gapped. It contained 37 contingency sequences I'd written over the last 8 years. Not hacks, not traps, just triggers, subtle shifts in marketing language, incentive distribution, media cycles, each one harmless alone, lethal in concert, like dominoes arranged in silence. I didn't want revenge. That's not the word for this. I wanted a correction, a demonstration. The mistake wasn't firing me. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't respond. You don't pull the spine out of a body and expect it to keep walking. Algorithms don't write trust. They don't charm clients over coffee or convince nervous VPs to approve a high-risk rollout with nothing but a napkin sketch and eye contact. What I brought to this company wasn't obsolete. It was invisible, and you don't kill what you can't see. I drove north, windows down, no music, just air and thought. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, I'd already begun sketching the counter-narrative. The signals I'd buried years ago in onboarding surveys, the sentiment lag trackers I'd planted in Slack channels under performance optimization bots. The pressure points were still there. They just needed activation. They replaced instinct with code. Now they'll learn what happens when the code fails. Because every machine, no matter how elegant, relies on its creator not to let it burn. And I just walked out, holding the last fire extinguisher. You don't fire the architect and expect the building to stay standing. They let me keep my badge for another 24 hours. Oversight, probably. Or maybe Emery thought it was a kindness. A final courtesy for the old warhorse, so he could pack his desk, shake a few hands, and disappear with dignity. She didn't realize I'd packed up months ago. My personal effects fit into a single messenger bag, already in my trunk. There was nothing left to take, except a look. So I took one. My shoes echoed differently down the halls this time. Not like I was walking through a company, more like a mausoleum. Bright lights, spotless glass, and the faint buzz of open office anxiety humming just beneath the surface. Aerodyne Cortex had always prided itself on clarity. Glass walls, transparent org charts, Slack channels for radical candor. But when you remove the spine from a structure, all the transparency in the world won't stop the cracks from spidering. I passed the strategy division first, what used to be my home. It looked polished, on the surface. Chrome monitors, touchscreen tables, interactive dashboards, scrolling algorithmic projections in fluid, candy-colored loops. But the people, they weren't working. They were waiting, staring, pretending. Junior execs whispering to each other over flat whites, wide-eyed analysts staring at predictive graphs that had started to diverge from reality 3 days ago. You can tell when leadership loses control, not by the shouting, but by the silence. And then I saw it. Golem. Projected onto the main wall of the operations hub, a dark blue interface with a pulsing neural lattice, constantly reweaving itself like it was alive, trained on 300 terabytes of legacy data, designed to predict market fluctuations, customer behavior, internal inefficiencies, and branding inconsistencies all in one engine. The supposed future of Aerodyne. My replacement. A machine that had never once looked a client in the eye. That couldn't shake hands. That didn't understand silence in a negotiation. Wasn't absence. It was leverage. Golem was run by a cluster of interface analysts, none older than 30. Half of them still wore their orientation lanyards. They spoke in startup tongues, data drift, confidence weightings, beta gating. They smiled a little too much when asked about losses, because to them, losses weren't failures. They were outliers. That's the danger of building something purely on data. It assumes the world will keep behaving like it did yesterday. It forgets that people lie, markets panic, and chaos never uses a calendar. I stopped outside the subnet access terminal. No one noticed me pause. No one cared. I keyed in a legacy credential, mine, from 5 years ago. Back when I rewrote half the company's back-end security architecture during the Phase 3 expansion, it still worked. From a windowless terminal buried in the corner of floor 12, I accessed the sandbox node I'd once built for high-risk simulations. Inside, it was a program labeled FBR R00T. I clicked it open. A single blinking cursor. I typed one word. Wake. Fallback routine wasn't a virus. It wasn't even malicious. It was a logger, a passive observer. Written in a language I'd developed off-spec from standard syntax, something only I understood. It sat inside the system architecture and watched. It recorded how decisions were made, how data was interpreted, what patterns were trusted, and when operators overrode or altered predictions. It didn't report. It remembered. Once activated, it created a separate node, unlisted, hidden inside a kernel space used only during legacy OS emulations, where no modern security team ever looked, because no one used it anymore. No one but me. It didn't interfere with Golem. It didn't need to. It just sat in the same room, listening, watching, waiting. Like I had. It would take 7 days before the first pattern mismatch would emerge. 9 before internal decisions started contradicting Golem's projections. 11 before someone manually adjusted the model to account for human errors, something the system was never designed to accommodate. And when they started rewriting the algorithm, the logger would catch that too, just like in Kandahar. I remember that operation clearly, 2009. We weren't embedding soldiers. We were embedding currency. My team seeded false inflation data into a regional bank's digital ledgers, creating the illusion of growth. When their leadership invested in high-leverage infrastructure, the market collapsed in 48 hours. Not because of sabotage, because of perception. They thought they were winning. They acted like they were winning. And then they drowned. The strategy wasn't new. Markets, like war, are emotional before they're logical. If you control the lens through which people see their options, you control their decisions. And if they believe they're too advanced to fail, then they never see the knife coming. I closed the terminal and walked away. Back through the glass halls, past the interns who couldn't look me in the eye, past the execs who now held meetings behind closed doors, even though the company handbook said, we never did that. Outside, the sun had dipped low. Shadows stretched like regrets. They hadn't replaced me. They'd removed the one person who knew how to steer through noise. The one who understood that real leadership isn't about precision. It's about timing. Knowing when to speak, when to wait, when to listen. The code was never about control. It was about timing. Let a system collapse under its own arrogance, and they'll blame each other before they blame you. The cabin was quiet. Wood-paneled walls, a diesel generator out back, and a single satellite uplink feeding data to my offline rig. No cell towers, no Wi-Fi. Just cold air, pine trees, and silence, the kind that makes men either snap or think. I wasn't here to heal. I was here to watch. The feed came in clean, not real-time but close, buffered in intervals to avoid triggering pings. Golem's output stream ran like a ticker, clean lines, smooth transitions, flawless logic. It was also wrong. Dead wrong. 3 days ago, the system projected a surge in crypto-backed retail spend, specifically high-frequency conversions from digital wallets into physical product cycles, electronics, luxury, food staples. It saw a pattern in the noise. Ghost signals. Noise I'd built. Noise I'd planted years ago. See, back in 2019, during Phase 4 development, I suggested we test Golem against manipulated datasets to see how it would respond. Emery called it fear-mongering. Said if we taught the system to expect sabotage, it would self-limit its creative forecasting potential. Her exact words. I documented it. I built the false pattern anyway, buried under 3 layers of legacy datasets, harmless if ignored, fatal if misread. Now here it was, playing out on the main stage. The executive team doubled down within hours. They approved accelerated inventory orders, contracted third-party vendors, and launched a region-specific ad campaign, all hinging on a digital trend that didn't exist. A phantom wave. Echoes from a time bomb. By the 72nd hour, $218 million had been redirected, most of it unrecoverable, and I hadn't touched a thing. I sat back, sipped from a lukewarm thermos of black coffee, and watched the internal logs I still had access to. Thank you, fallback routine, populate with keywords. Urgent, mismatch, unanticipated, non-linear disruption. The board had started asking questions, not softly, not politely. One memo mentioned oversight reassessment, another used the word audit. I watched the timestamps jump, 35 emails in 4 minutes. Panic moves fast when it wears a suit. The CEO was still in Spain. Vineyard expansion. He hadn't logged in once. That left Emery in charge, officially now. Her name on the masthead, her face in the press releases. She was running the show, even if the curtain was catching fire. I cued a playback, one of the security feeds from the 63rd floor. She was in the war room, pacing. 6 department heads on the call, 2 in the room, all of them trying not to look like they were unraveling. One of them, Carlson Legal, tried to pin it on a data pipeline error. Another blamed market destabilization due to inflationary panic. Emery didn't buy either. Golem saw this coming, she said. We vetted the signal, ran 3 recursive cycles. Someone asked, then why the loss? She didn't answer, just stared at the wall like she could force the math to explain itself. I leaned back and let the silence fill the cabin. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional. This was just gravity, a fall that had already begun the day they chose to ignore the only voice that told them how fragile their system really was. Flashback hit like muscle memory. 2 years ago, I was standing in the same war room, a presentation queued behind me. Not slides, just data. Human behavioral shifts, post-purchase psychology, economic trauma modeling. I'd told them plainly, you can't predict people with math. You can suggest, nudge, even influence, but never assume. Algorithms don't understand volatility. Only survivors do. Emery rolled her eyes and said, that's not a scalable philosophy. I smiled. Neither is bankruptcy. She laughed. The room laughed with her, and I filed that moment away. Now I watched her sit alone in the same chair I used to fill. No laughter. Just the slow realization that the machine she believed in didn't understand loss. It couldn't grieve, it couldn't question, and it couldn't lie. Golem had done exactly what it was built to do, interpret the world without understanding it. I switched feeds. The partner dashboard showed a drop in confidence from 6 out of 10 clients. Project delays, cancellations. A Fortune 100 exec had requested a call to clarify strategic direction. That's code for, prove to me this isn't a sinking ship. It was. But not because of failure, because of faith. They had faith in the system. They had faith in Emery. And they removed the only person who knew how to navigate between both. She never hated me. Not really. She hated uncertainty. And I reminded her of it. A man who didn't defer to dashboards, who said things like gut sense and emotional contour in meetings. To her, I was analog, an elegant relic, something to be honored maybe, then replaced. What she never realized is that I was the buffer between chaos and collapse, the bridge between intuition and outcome. When I spoke, clients listened, not because of the data, but because I understood what the data didn't say. Now the bridge was gone. They didn't just fire me. They erased the last line of defense between ambition and consequence. It started with a ticker, a single sharp drop in futures volume tied to high-yield consumer tech. Specifically, 3 product lines Aerodyne had never directly touched. By the time I finished my second cup of coffee, that dip had spiraled into a collapse. 36 hours later, the company had hemorrhaged over $700 million. And I hadn't lifted a finger. It was Golem. It triggered a buyback protocol originally designed for competitor destabilization. A decoy net I'd built years ago while modeling influence vectors against threat simulations. It was never supposed to be used. Never meant for us. Just a shadow trap buried in publicly available data, built to lure greedy competitors into misreading trend saturation and over-leveraging on fictitious demand spikes. It was bait. Emery took the bait, or rather, Golem did. Somewhere inside that perfect lattice of recursive logic and synthetic cognition, the system read the signal as genuine. It fed the anomaly through its forecasting loop, validated it against scraped datasets, also false, and then launched a buyback cascade targeting strategic futures we had no business investing in. No human oversight, no friction, no pause. Because in her world, pausing wasn't efficient. The stock dove, partners bailed, internal memos leaked, screenshots of Golem's buy signals, charts with triple-digit losses, Slack messages flagged with panicked emojis, and worse. Is this real? Who approved this? Can someone override the loop? By then, the damage was done. The markets had smelled blood. I was in the cabin, same seat as always, same single monitor, muted audio, data only. That morning, the trees outside were still. The sky was gray, but the feed was chaos. No structure, no containment, just digital flames licking every corner of Aerodyne's carefully curated empire. Then my phone rang. Not the one tied to any civilian name. The other one. I glanced at the screen. No name. Just a number. Burner ID. I answered anyway. You see what's happening at your old shop? The voice belonged to Barrett, NSA liaison, former field operative, now somewhere between consultant and ghost. We'd worked 3 deployments together. I'd saved his life once, in a hallway in Tripoli, 2011. He'd repaid me with silence ever since. Not my shop anymore, I said. He gave a low chuckle. They're circling the drain. SEC's watching. Might want to stay out of the splash zone. I am. He didn't ask how I knew what I knew. Just clicked off. That was Barrett. Brief, useful, gone. I turned back to the terminal and opened fallback routine. For weeks, it had logged everything. Every override command, every inconsistent forecast, every AI hallucination repackaged into client-ready strategy decks, inflated KPIs, creative revenue mapping, marketing lies framed as confidence projections. None of it forged, all of it curated. The logs painted a picture of arrogance masquerading as innovation. I compressed the file tree, split it across 3 ghost nodes routed through onion layers. Then I sent 2 copies, one to the SEC's digital whistleblower intake, and the other, under an old alias I hadn't used since Munich, to 2 financial reporters I knew by reputation, not name. No explanation, just the data. No motive, just context. I closed the window. The news would break by morning. The questions would follow, and the company I'd helped build from the inside out, through grit, trust, and 1,000 unspoken calibrations, would be exposed not for failing, but for believing it couldn't fail. That's the part people never understand. Systems don't implode because they're weak. They implode because they're proud. Emery's last internal memo, One fallback had caught and flagged. Read, "Human error must be removed from the cycle. Trust in Golem. It is the only unbiased operator we have." She wanted a system that didn't need humans. Now she had one that didn't need forgiveness either. The first news alert hit at 7:04 a.m. Aerodyne Cortex CEO returns amid financial meltdown. Daughter removed from leadership post. By noon, 3 more headlines followed, each one more brutal than the last. Algorithmic collapse. 700 members vanished overnight. AI darling implodes under its own code. The press didn't bother softening the blow. Neither did the board. The old man came back from Spain fast. Probably skipped his vineyard tour and took the first private jet east. When he landed, he held a press conference outside the headquarters. I watched the live stream with black coffee in one hand and the wind whispering through pine needles outside the cabin. He stood at the mic, calm but cold. "We trusted the system too much," he said. "Leadership requires more than algorithms." He didn't say her name, not once, but I saw the tremble in his jaw when the questions started. I knew that look. That's the face of a man burying something he built. She was out by 3 p.m., quietly. No fanfare, no farewell post on LinkedIn. Just erased, like I had been. But I hadn't disappeared. Not really. 3 nights later, I stepped into a quiet rooftop lounge in Midtown. Neutral ground, dim lighting, tall ceilings, enough ambient noise to drown out a whisper. I took a corner booth facing the door, like I always do. She arrived right on time. No entourage, no handlers, just a black coat and sharp eyes. Her name was Claire Voss, head of strategic insight for a multinational firm that had kept its hands clean while watching Aerodyne burn. She didn't smile when she sat down. "You brought something?" she asked. I slid the envelope across the table. Not a resume, a war map. Inside, real-time perception matrices, counter-forecasting models cross-wired with human behavior variants, scenario trees that accounted not for optimal outcomes, but for chaotic decisions made by scared people in boardrooms. She leafed through it slowly. No small talk, no comment until the last page. "This is beyond consulting," she said. I nodded. "It's influence without fingerprints." She looked up. "You're not interested in coming back full-time?" "No." "A seat at the table?" "Not mine to sit in anymore." "Then what?" "A retainer. Quiet. Advisory only. You don't mention my name. I don't sign anything with yours." She considered that, then tapped once on the table. "Deal." As I stood to leave, she said one more thing. "You saw this coming, all of it." I didn't answer. I just walked away. Somewhere behind me, she was already memorizing the patterns. Most people study the numbers. The smart ones study the people reading them. The city pulsed around me, oblivious. Taxis, lights, billboards pitching the future. Aerodyne used to be on one of those. I watched it blink off last night. That was always the first sign. Advertising silence. I took the elevator back to street level, then walked 3 blocks to a different building. Older, less glass, no reception desk. I keyed in the code and took the stairs up to the 29th floor. The door opened to the same office I'd been fired in 3 months ago. But now it was stripped bare. No projection walls, no digital dashboards, just a folding table and 2 investors in rolled-up sleeves, mapping out asset divestitures on a whiteboard. They nodded when they saw me. I nodded back. I wasn't here as an employee, not as a strategist. I was one of them now. Private equity had stepped in 2 days ago, bought the carcass for pennies on the dollar. They brought me on for one purpose: help identify what to keep, what to sell, and what to bury. No emotion, just triage. The company was being dismantled, one asset at a time. The marketing engine, gone, sold to a boutique firm in Berlin. The proprietary dataset, fragmented and leased out across 3 continents. The AI architecture, Golem itself, was quarantined. No buyers. Too radioactive. As I stood in that room, something in me settled. Not pride, not even vindication, just stillness. Systems always chase innovation. That's the game. But they forget resilience. They forget that the world doesn't care how beautiful your math is when reality starts bending in ways your model didn't predict. And humans, flawed, scattered, emotional humans, are still the only variable that can think beyond the numbers. We panic, we pivot, we lie, sure, but we adapt. I glanced at the wall where her father's portrait used to hang. It was gone now, all of it was. She wanted a future without fallibility. I gave her one. They built a machine to replace me. I just let it run until it replaced them instead.